Let her die. She's worthless anyway. Just dead weight waiting to be buried. Those were the words Marco Valentini whispered to his mistress right beside his wife's hospital bed, while Isabella lay in a coma, fighting for the life they had already thrown away. They planned her funeral, chose the flowers, argued over who would get the house, the inheritance, her grandmother's ruby necklace worth $50,000. They laughed. They kissed. They celebrated her slow death. Isabella heard nothing. But there was a man standing in the shadows of that hospital corridor who heard every single word. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't family. He was Dante Romano, the most feared Italian mafia boss in Chicago. The man who had sworn an oath 23 years ago to protect the 8-year-old girl who saved his life in a blood-soaked alley. Then one morning everything changed. A finger twitched. A breath deepened. A nurse gasped. "She's waking up." And the moment those words echoed through the room, Marco panicked. Not from joy but from terror. Terror of what she might remember. So he did the unthinkable. Something darker than any betrayal. Something he believed no one would ever witness. But fate has a way of exposing monsters at the moment they feel safest. And Dante Romano, the ghost in the shadows, won't let anyone harm her. Not even her husband. Especially not her husband. If you want to know whether Isabella escapes the hands of the man who wants her dead, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next will leave you speechless. The private surveillance room was buried 3 floors beneath a luxury Chicago high-rise. Drowned in darkness except for the cold blue glow of a dozen monitors. Dante Romano sat motionless in a leather chair, his coal-black eyes locked on one screen. The feed from Northwestern Memorial Hospital, room 847, where a young woman lay surrounded by machines and tubes. Isabella Valentini. That name had been carved into his soul for 23 years. Like a scar that refused to heal. Like a promise written in blood. Dante watched every shallow rise and fall of her chest. Every blink from the nurse checking vitals. Every step taken by the man who called himself her husband whenever he entered that room. And every time Marco Valentini appeared on screen, Dante's jaw clenched so hard his teeth could crack diamonds. A soft knock interrupted the silence. "Come in," Dante said without turning. The door opened and Vincent Caruso stepped inside. Tall, steady, with the quiet competence of a man who'd spent 18 years as Dante's right hand. Vincent was the only person who knew why the most powerful Italian mafia boss in Chicago was obsessed with an ordinary woman lying in a coma. "Boss, I have the report." Vincent set a thick folder on the desk. Dante still didn't look away from the screen. "Talk." Vincent opened the file and began reading. Marco Valentini, 34 years old. Real estate developer. Companies hemorrhaging money. Nearly $700,000 in debt between the bank and private creditors. He's 3 months behind on commercial rent. And he took out a life insurance policy on his wife 8 months before the accident. $3 million payout. Dante's eyes darkened like storm clouds rolling in before thunder. What else? Vincent hesitated, then continued. The woman who visits Isabella regularly, Sofia Ricci. She's not just a friend like she claims. Our investigation shows she and Marco have been involved for at least 5 years. Which means it started a year before he even met Isabella. Dante rose slowly and walked to the largest monitor. Isabella lay there, pale and fragile. Her dark hair spread across a white pillow. She was still beautiful. Still carried that innocence he remembered from 23 years ago, when she was just a child with warm brown eyes and a smile that knew no fear. Now she lay fighting death while the man who should have protected her prayed she'd never wake up. What does he say to that woman when they're in the room together? Dante asked, his voice deadly calm. "Boss, we can't monitor audio remotely with the hospital's current setup. The cameras don't record sound. We need a permanent listening device to capture their confessions." Dante was silent for a long moment. Beyond the window, the Chicago skyline glittered against the night. Skyscrapers lit up like false stars. But Dante saw nothing except Isabella's face on that screen. She had saved his life when he had nobody. Given him water when he was dying of thirst. Hidden him in a freezing garage when the entire city wanted him dead. An 8-year-old child with gentle brown eyes and courage that belonged to someone 10 times her age. "Install a listening device in her room," Dante ordered. "I want to hear everything that bastard says." Vincent nodded. "Understood. Anything else?" Dante turned to his second-in-command. His gaze so cold Vincent had to suppress a shiver. "Investigate that car accident." I want to know exactly what happened that night. The brakes, the steering, the road conditions, everything. I want a full report within 48 hours. Vincent knew that wasn't a request. It was a command. He bowed his head and left. The room returned to silence. Dante stood alone before the screen, watching Isabella breathe through machines that kept her tethered to life. He wasn't a good man. He knew that. His hands had been stained with the blood of more enemies than he could count. He'd built his empire on the bones of anyone who dared cross the Romano family. He'd done things that would send most men screaming into madness. But for Isabella, he would be anything she needed. A protector, a guardian angel, or a devil ready to drag anyone who hurt her straight into hell. 23 years ago, she had saved him with the pure kindness of a child. 23 years later, he would save her at any cost. Dante placed his hand on the screen where Isabella's face appeared. His voice barely a whisper in the darkness. I promised I'd protect you, Isabella. And Dante Romano never breaks a promise. What Isabella is about to discover will shatter everything she thought she knew about her marriage. Stay with me because the truth is darker than you can imagine. 23 years earlier, on a night when Chicago drowned in freezing rain, 17-year-old Dante Romano thought he was going to die. He lay bleeding in an alley behind abandoned warehouses in the South Side. A bullet wound torn through his left shoulder, rain hammering his face like needles of ice. His father, Lorenzo Romano, a powerful capo in the Chicago Italian Mafia, had been murdered right in front of him during a rival family ambush. The killers chased Dante for 4 hours through rain-soaked streets, shot him once, then vanished. Now he was alone, orphaned, bleeding out, waiting for death. He tried to reach his father's men, but nobody answered. Maybe they were dead too. Maybe they'd betrayed the Romano family. He didn't care anymore. His eyelids grew impossibly heavy, and he let them close. Then he heard footsteps, small and light. Dante forced his eyes open, his hand trembling toward the knife hidden in his boot. But what he saw wasn't an enemy. It was a little girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a worn pink jacket, dark hair plastered to her face by rain, standing at the mouth of the alley with wide brown eyes. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stood there, head tilted, as if trying to understand what she was seeing. Go, Dante growled, his voice weak and ragged. This isn't safe for you. The girl didn't listen. Instead, she stepped closer, knelt beside him, her gaze fixed on the blood spreading across his coat. You're really hurt, she said softly without fear. You need help. Dante wanted to push her away, to shout at her to run before the men hunting him came back. But he had no strength left. All he could do was lie there and watch this strange little girl stand up and sprint away. He thought she'd abandoned him. He didn't blame her. But 5 minutes later she came back, carrying an old towel, a bottle of water, and a sandwich wrapped in plastic. I don't have real bandages, she said, her small hands already pressing the towel against his wound. But my mama says you have to stop bleeding first. Does it hurt a lot? Dante clenched his teeth as pain ripped through him when she pressed harder. But he didn't scream. He only watched her. Watched her small face tight with concentration. Watched her hands tremble but still tried to do exactly what she'd been taught. Who are you? He whispered. The girl looked up and smiled. A smile Dante would never forget for the rest of his life. I'm Isabella. Isabella Moretti. I live in the yellow house at the end of the alley with my mama and papa. Who are you? Dante didn't answer. He didn't want to drag her into the blood-soaked world he came from. But Isabella didn't need an answer. She just kept helping him as if saving a dying stranger in a freezing alley was the most normal thing in the world. For days, Isabella hid Dante in the old garage behind her house for 4 full days. Each day she snuck him food and water. She stole antiseptic from her mother's medicine cabinet to clean his wound. She brought him blankets when the nights turned brutally cold. She never asked who he was. Never asked why he'd been shot. Never asked for anything at all. She just helped with all the innocence and kindness an 8-year-old could have. On the 5th day, Dante's people finally found him, Vincent and 3 other loyal soldiers. They came at dawn, silent and fast, and carried him to safety. But before he left, Dante turned back one last time. Isabella stood in the doorway of the garage, brown eyes shining in the early light, waving goodbye. Promise me, she called after him, her voice clear as a bell. You have to live. Promise me you'll live. Dante stopped. He turned, looked straight into her eyes, and for the first time in his brutal life, he wanted to keep a promise. "I'll live, Isabella," he said, his voice rough but certain. "And I'll never forget you. I promise." That morning, Dante Romano disappeared into the underworld. But he kept his word. For 23 years, he watched her from a distance, protecting her without her ever knowing. And now, as she lay in a coma with a man who wanted her dead standing right beside her, Dante wouldn't let anyone touch her. Not ever again. 24 hours after Dante gave the order, the listening device was installed perfectly in Isabella's hospital room, hidden inside a decorative plant on the windowsill where no one would ever think to check. And that night, for the first time, the device captured something that made Dante's blood run cold. Marco Valentini's voice came through the speaker, low and calculated, stripped of the grief he performed in front of doctors and nurses. $3 million, Sofia. $3 million. Do you understand how much money that is? Sofia Ricci's giggle slipped between his words. Of course I understand, baby. I helped you pick that policy, remember? But you have to be patient. She's not dead yet. Dante sat perfectly still in the darkness, his black eyes fixed on the small speaker. Every word landed like a blade driven into his chest. Not because it hurt, but because it enraged him beyond measure. The doctor says her brain activity is minimal, Marco continued, impatience seeping through. If I can convince them she has no hope, they'll recommend pulling life support. I'm her husband. I have medical power of attorney. The decision is mine. Sofia was quiet for a moment. What about her mother? Rosa doesn't seem to trust you. Marco snorted. Rosa Moretti is just a widow with no legal power. I already forged Isabella's signature on documents before the accident. Every medical decision belongs to me. Dante's fist clenched so hard his knuckles cracked. He planned this in advance. He calculated everything before Isabella ever crashed. Which could only mean one thing. It wasn't an accident. Sofia's voice came again, this time with sick excitement. So when are you talking to the doctor? Tomorrow, Marco answered. I'll play the devastated husband who can't stand watching his wife suffer. I'll cry. I'll shake. I'll say she told me she never wanted to live like a vegetable. They always believe it. A soft kiss sounded through the speaker, followed by Sofia's satisfied laugh. I love you, she purred. When this is over, where should we go? Amalfi Coast, Marco said without hesitation. Private villa. Nobody bothering us. We deserve that after everything we've been through. Dante felt like his chest would explode. Been through. He spoke of suffering while his wife lay dying in that bed because of him. He spoke of suffering while planning to kill her again if the first attempt hadn't worked. Vincent walked in just as the conversation ended. He looked at Dante, at the hands clenched so tightly blood could barely flow through them, at the eyes burning with hellfire. Boss, Vincent said softly, do you want me to handle him? Dante didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the window, and stared out at Chicago drowning in night. Not yet, Dante finally said, his voice ice cold. Death would be too quick. Too merciful for a man like him. I want him to lose everything first: money, reputation, freedom. I want him to watch his world collapse piece by piece before I come for the last thing he has left. Vincent nodded, understanding perfectly. And her. Dante turned back to the screen where Isabella still lay motionless beneath tubes and machines. His face softened just a fraction before hardening again. She'll live, he said with absolute certainty. Even if I have to burn this entire city down to make it happen. What happens next will shock you. Marco is about to make a fatal mistake, and Dante Romano is waiting in the shadows. Don't look away. The darkness around Isabella began to thin. It wasn't that suffocating black wall anymore. Now it was more like a veil. Thin enough for sounds of the outside world to slip through with sharper clarity. Isabella still couldn't open her eyes. Still couldn't move. But she could hear. And she heard Sofia's voice. That familiar voice. Close to her ear. Carrying the perfume Isabella used to love. A scent that now made her want to vomit. Sofia was on the phone. Probably thinking Isabella couldn't hear anything. Don't worry, Sofia said, her voice low but clear. She still isn't fully awake. The doctor said it's just reflexes. Even if she does remember something, who's going to believe someone who just woke from a coma? Silence as Marco spoke on the other end. Then Sofia continued. That accident? The police already closed the case. They said she lost control because of wet roads and poor visibility. Nobody suspects anything. You're worrying too much. Isabella's heart hammered inside her chest. Accident. Lost control. Those words drilled into her mind, dragging behind them a flood of memory she tried to bury. The memory of that night. Isabella had been waiting for Marco to come home for their 4-year anniversary dinner. She'd cooked his favorite meal, lit candles, worn her prettiest dress. But Marco called saying he had an urgent business meeting, promising to make it up to her next week. Isabella was disappointed but didn't complain. She just sat alone in their quiet condo, watching the candles burn down. Then Marco's phone buzzed. He'd left it on the kitchen counter. Isabella hadn't meant to look, but the screen lit up with a message from Sophia, and what she read shattered her entire world. I miss you, baby. Can you sneak away tonight? I already booked our usual hotel room. Same as always, my love. Isabella stood there frozen, feeling like someone had driven a knife through her heart. She scrolled through earlier messages. Every line was another blade. Words of love. Photos that couldn't be misunderstood. Plans for their future after they dealt with the Isabella problem. Dealt. That was the word they used for her. Like she was garbage that needed to be thrown away. Isabella didn't cry. She was too shocked to cry. She just grabbed her car keys and walked out, deciding to drive to her mother's house, deciding she would file for divorce, deciding she would start over. She didn't know that was exactly the decision Marco and Sophia had predicted. She didn't know someone had already cut her brake line. She drove onto the highway, rain beginning to fall, visibility shrinking. She pressed the brakes when she saw the semi-truck ahead slow suddenly, but the pedal sank to the floor and the car didn't slow. She pressed again and again, but the vehicle kept surging forward like a wild animal she couldn't control. In the final moment before the car went over the embankment, Isabella remembered thinking, Marco always checked my car before long drives. He knew. He knew I'd see those messages. He wanted this. Now, lying in darkness and hearing Sophia talk about the accident like it was just a minor inconvenience, Isabella finally understood the complete truth. He tried to kill me. Rage flared inside Isabella. Stronger than pain, stronger than fear, stronger than the darkness holding her captive. She wanted to scream. She wanted to open her eyes. She wanted to look straight at the man who betrayed her, and let him know she was still alive. That she remembered everything. That he would pay. And deep inside that darkness, Isabella Valentini made herself a vow. She would wake up. Not to be saved but to take revenge. 3 days after secretly meeting with Sophia, Marco Valentini decided to act. He'd studied the hospital schedule carefully, discovering that on Saturday nights, there was only one nurse on duty for the entire 8th floor. He'd mapped out every step of how to get into Isabella's room without being detected. Tonight was that night. He left the hospital at 9 p.m. as usual, playing the part of an exhausted husband. He drove home, waited until midnight, then returned through a side entrance he'd scouted weeks earlier. The underground parking garage was deserted at 1 a.m. Only a handful of cars belonging to night staff sat scattered under flickering yellow lights. Marco shut off his engine and sat in darkness for a moment, steadying himself. His heart raced, not from guilt but from fear of getting caught. He took a deep breath, opened the door and stepped out. That's when he realized he wasn't alone. A sleek black Mercedes was parked nearby. A car he was certain hadn't been there when he arrived. The door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an immaculate black suit that seemed to merge with the shadows. A face carved from granite and coal-black eyes that locked onto Marco with the stare of a predator. Marco had never met him, but every survival instinct began screaming. Who are you? Marco asked, trying to keep his voice steady. What do you want? The man didn't answer right away. He walked closer, each step slow and deliberate, like a wolf closing in on prey. Behind him, 2 other men emerged from the shadows, cutting off every escape route. Marco backed up until his spine hit his own car. He wanted to run but his legs locked. He wanted to shout for help but his throat closed. I'm Dante Romano, the man finally said, his voice low and cold as winter ice. Maybe you've never heard my name, but after tonight you'll never forget it. Marco swallowed hard. Everyone in Chicago had heard of Dante Romano, the most feared Italian mafia boss in the city, the man who controlled half the underworld, the man whose enemies disappeared without a trace. I don't know you, Marco stammered. I have nothing to do with you. Why are you here? Dante stopped less than 3 feet away. Close enough for Marco to see the dangerous fire burning in those black eyes. You have everything to do with me, Dante said, each word clear as an execution sentence. Because you have something to do with her. Isabella Valentini. Your wife. The woman you tried to murder by cutting her brake line. The blood drained from Marco's face, leaving him pale as a corpse. Don't waste your breath lying, Dante continued, his voice never rising yet carrying terrifying weight. I know everything. I know you cut the brake line. I know you and Sofia Ricci planned to kill your wife for insurance money. I know you just discussed sabotaging her ventilator or increasing her sedatives. Marco shook so hard he could barely stand. How do you know? Because I'm the one who's been watching her, Dante answered, stepping even closer. For 23 years, I've protected her from a distance without her knowing. And now that a worm like you dares put hands on her, you think I'm going to stand by and watch? Dante grabbed Marco by the collar and yanked him forward until Marco could see every hard line of that merciless face. Listen carefully, Dante whispered, his voice like a devil's growl from hell. I know what you did to those brakes. If she loses even one more hair on her head, you'll lose more than money. You'll lose everything, your company, your freedom, and eventually your life. Dante released him, letting Marco drop to the concrete like a puppet with cut strings. Leave this hospital, Dante said as he turned away, and pray she lives. Because if she dies, hell will be the best place you can hope for. 1 week after that terrifying night in the parking garage, the miracle everyone had been waiting for finally happened. Isabella Valentini opened her eyes. It was an ordinary morning. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, laying warm streaks. Drunk on whiskey and desperate to silence her forever, he returned to the hospital at 2 a.m. He slipped through the side entrance, avoiding cameras, and made his way to room 847. What he didn't know was that Dante had anticipated this exact move. When Marco entered Isabella's darkened room and approached her bed with trembling hands reaching for the 4-line, Isabella's eyes snapped open. Help me! She screamed with every ounce of strength. Help me! Marco lunged forward, clamping a hand over her mouth. Shut up! Just shut up and die. But Isabella bit his hand hard, making him howl. She kept screaming, kept fighting. Running footsteps thundered in the hallway. Security shouting. Someone pounding on the door. Marco looked around like a cornered animal. He knew he'd lost. His bloodshot eyes turned back to Isabella, his hands reaching for her throat. If I can't have you, no one can, he roared. And at that exact moment the door exploded inward. Dante Romano stood there like an avenging god emerging from darkness. Tall, commanding, black eyes burning with hellfire. He'd been watching everything through the private camera Vincent installed weeks earlier. He'd seen Marco slip inside. He'd heard every word. Before Marco could react, Dante was on him. Dante's hand, hard as steel, closed around Marco's throat, lifted him clean off the ground, and slammed him into the wall so hard the impact cracked the plaster. Who are you? Marco wheezed, legs kicking helplessly. I'm Dante Romano, Dante answered, his voice a devil's growl. But all you need to know is this. I'm the man she saved 23 years ago. Marco's eyes went wide with confusion. 23 years ago she saved my life when I was bleeding to death in an alley. Dante continued, tightening his grip. She gave me water. She bandaged my wounds. She was the only angel I've ever had. And you dared to put your filthy hands on my angel. Dante slammed Marco into the wall again. You cut her brake line. You planned to kill her for insurance money. You called her worthless right beside her hospital bed. And tonight you came here to finish the job. Marco broke down completely. Please have mercy. Dante laughed, a sound colder than ice. Mercy? You think you deserve mercy? Sirens wailed outside. Police flooded into the room moments later. Vincent had called them the instant Dante entered. Brandon Mitchell, you're under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and aggravated assault, the officer said, snapping handcuffs on Marco while he screamed and protested. Marco was dragged out, his screams echoing down the hallway. The room went quiet, leaving only Isabella and Dante. She looked at him. He looked at her. 23 years. Promise. In this moment, Dante opened his mouth as if to speak, then stopped. He only gave Isabella a small nod, his eyes holding everything he couldn't put into words. Then he stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. Isabella watched him go, her heart racing. She didn't know his name yet, didn't know who he was. But she knew one thing. That man had saved her the way she had once saved him. 1 year later, Isabella stood behind the counter of a small bakery called Angelo's, the shop she dreamed of opening for years. The dream Marco had crushed. Now it was real, sitting on a quiet Chicago street with cream-colored walls, large windows letting in golden sunlight, and the rich scent of fresh bread filling the air. Isabella had divorced Marco and reclaimed everything he tried to steal. Marco was sentenced to 28 years for attempted murder and fraud. Sophia got 18 years as an accomplice. Her mother, Rosa, now lived with her in a cozy apartment above the bakery, helping her bake each morning and chatting with regular customers. Isabella had fully recovered, physically and emotionally. She wasn't the fragile, naive girl anymore. She'd become stronger, wiser, more grateful for life than ever. But one thing never changed. Every month on the first day, a bouquet of white roses arrived at her bakery. No sender name, no return address, only a small card with familiar words. You are not alone. Be strong. Isabella knew where they came from. She knew who sent them. She tried to find Dante, sent letters through channels she believed might reach him, asked Vincent's people for a meeting. But Dante refused. He never appeared, never answered, never let her find him. He stayed in the shadows where he belonged, protecting her from a distance without staining the brightness of her life. A few blocks away, inside a black Mercedes parked along the street, Dante Romano sat watching Isabella through the bakery window. She was smiling at a customer, living the life she deserved. Sunlight fell on her dark hair, making her look like an angel in daylight. Boss, Vincent spoke from the driver's seat. She still wants to meet you. She sent another letter. Dante didn't answer. He only watched Isabella, watched her smile, watched the peace on her face. He'd kept his promise for 23 years, protected her when she needed protection. And now that she was safe, he would remain in the dark, watching from afar, being the silent guardian she would never need to meet. Because that was how he loved her. Without demanding, without possessing, without intruding. Just being here in the shadows, making sure she was always safe. Drive, Dante finally said. The car rolled forward, leaving the quiet street behind. But before it disappeared, Isabella suddenly looked up and turned toward the window. She couldn't see the car, couldn't see Dante, but she could feel him. She knew he was out there somewhere watching, protecting. And she smiled, the smile of someone who knows they are never alone. Dante, she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear. Thank you for everything. Evil grows in silence. Love is proven by actions, not words. And sometimes the person who wants you dead is lying right beside you in bed. But there are also people hidden in the dark, willing to sacrifice everything just so you can live. Isabella lived not because of luck, but because 23 years ago she planted a seed of kindness, and that seed became a fortress that protected her for life. This story teaches us that kindness is never forgotten. One small act of compassion can change someone's entire life. And one day it will return to you in ways you never imagined. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share this video with someone you love. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had someone protect you without you knowing? We'd love to hear your story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.